Can you hear my audio now?
I can. Earlier, you had a little bit of a delay, but
Yes, yes. I'm just fixing it. So it's fine now?
yeah, seems fine now.
Can you hear my audio now?
I can. Earlier, you had a little bit of a delay. Ha 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 ha. We are live.
We're live. Oh my God.
Awesome. Um, cool. I'm going to just do a little social blast here.
All right. So are we just on YouTube?
Yep, we're on YouTube right now. Hey, people.
Great.
The audio program.
Let's post on the Discord maybe.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Boom. There it is. And we'll go to LinkedIn. And got to tag you in as well.
Oh,
That's it. And Discord. I really need to get one of those things that just posts it everywhere all at
exactly.
once. Should I do an everybody blast? I only normally do those for really big things. I'll
Yeah, why
just
not?
yeah,
Yeah, why not? Let's bring them in. They might have questions and things they can actually add to our dialogue.
yeah. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's bring everybody in. And Facebook. Okay, how many people do we have joining us? So we have 5 people joining us. Hey, 5 people.
Yeah.
Who's here with us? Come say hi. That was 6 people.
Here you go.
Hey, what's up, Daniel? If you don't know Daniel, Daniel is the person who makes our soul tutorials. And I love how we could just hit a button and it's just like we're there. We're out there to the world. I think that's so cool. So let me pop out the chat here before we go. 9 people. 12 people.
So I see Nikolai on the chat saying that he's been learning juice for a bit, and he's been on the Discord and learning from the people on Discord, which is awesome.
Yeah, super awesome. Yeah, thanks for joining us, Nikolai. Hello, Adam. Yeah, we'll give a couple more minutes for people to step in and say hi.
You know, it's really kind of amazing how the Discord community has evolved.
It's been something, hasn't it? It's really been something. And there are so many discussions that are happening nowadays that I can't even keep up with them all. It's pretty scary in some ways.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's really evolved, and some of the some of the discussions are in topics that I know nothing about. Right, there's all the, like, now there's a blueprint channel and stuff that I'm reading about, and I'm happy to learn about. But like, there's all these experts in specific fields that are contributing.
Mhm. Yeah, we got Blueprint, we got Max MSP. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. We're gonna get Nick on here soon as well to talk about Blueprint and what he's doing with that. You got a phone call?
And my mom is calling. See if you can.
Okay. Yeah, thanks everybody who's joining us. Hope you're having a great Friday. We just kind of did this as a last minute thing, really. We just thought we were talking yesterday, and we were talking about some stuff, and Eyal said, "You know what? We should really do a video about this." And I said, "Yeah, that sounds great." He says, "Should we do one tomorrow?" And I thought, "Yeah, sure, why not?" Because we've been meaning to do videos for a while now, and I always get caught up in meetings and paperwork and stuff. And then Eyal invited me in officially to a meeting. So once it's in the diary, it's official. So yeah, so there's no agenda really here today. So we thought that it would be pretty cool to just talk about some things that have been happening in the audio programming world. So there's been a lot of exciting stuff, a lot of things that I've seen. Some of them I could talk about, some of them I can't really talk about. But it's a really exciting time for audio development, and we're really quite humbled to be, here able to be on one of the larger platforms where we're able to speak about this to everybody. And yeah, what an awesome opportunity. So I guess first order of business would be to us congratulating Eyal. So yesterday you won the Midi Innovation Award. It was actually you and Gal as well. So I'll let you take the spotlight and tell everybody a little bit about it.
Yeah, that was really exciting. So there's this new plugin that came out, and it was created by this musician from India, right? His name is Krishna Chetan. He's a very, very good musician from India, and he came with this idea. And actually, the lead developer for this plugin was Gal Benaim, which is who happens to be also my girlfriend, but she's also a very, very talented developer.
Mhm.
And I was a consultant on the project, so I kind of knew what was happening, and I was a bit involved. She was doing the majority of the heavy lifting. Uh, and yesterday there was the MIDI Innovation Awards as the part of the NAM, of the
Yeah,
virtual activities, and we won, and that was really exciting that it got some recognition on that front.
that's amazing. Yeah, and can you tell people a little bit about the plugin? What the plugin actually does?
Yeah, and perhaps I can even show it. So maybe
Oh,
maybe
maybe I'll give you sharing permissions.
yeah.
Here you go. Should be good to go now.
So live demos are always supposed to fail, right? All right, so let's see what's going on. I'm gonna uh, play a few notes. Am I getting across?
Yep, you're all good.
Great. Let's see it. I'm sending out my audio, my MIDI. Great. Okay. So that's a problem that's meant to solve a universal problem with using pitch bend on MIDI keyboards. And let me first show the problem before we show the solution. So the problem was, I'm just, you can see my hands here, but I just have a MIDI keyboard underneath uh, my screen, and I'm just controlling the built-in Logic electric piano. This is just whatever. This is just the thing that comes with Logic if you buy it. And here's what happens if you try to, if you ever use the pitch bend on the keyboard and you try to control any kind of synthesizer, sampler, whatever. So a pitch bend usually has a range, right? Usually I'm playing the note and then you pitch bend up and it goes like 2 semitones up or something. There's usually a default interval, like 1 semitone up. And if you go down, it's going to go two semitones up and 2 semitones down would be the default. In some instruments, you can configure that. So maybe you can do 1 octave up or down, but really it's just a fixed number of semitones that you go up and down. And you can try, if you have very sensitive fingers, you can try to control that. So for example, if I have this 2 semitones and maybe I want to pitch bend just 1 semitone up, right? I want to go I'm playing C and I want to go to C sharp. So you have to have really sensitive fingers, right? You have to go something like, and you can see it's really hard. Like my finger is moving in these micro steps. It's really hard to be in tune. If I'd played this fast and I wanted to do something like just pitch bend up to this note, I'm getting off tune a bit and it's hard to play. And so there's players who learned how to control this, right? To learn how to really find the note that they're looking for in the pitch bend, but it's pretty hard. So and also it's creating weird things, because let's say you're playing in a key, like let's say you're playing in C major, and I'm just going to play, just a regular C major key. And if you're starting to use the pitch bend, so I press C and I pitch bend up. That makes sense. That goes to D. I go to D and I pitch bend up. That makes sense. That goes to E. But then E suddenly gives me F sharp, so I'm kind of out of tune. Right? It's super weird. Like the pitch bend gives you all these like off-key notes, and it doesn't make any sense. So that's a problem. That's something that skilled players had to learn how to deal with. Right? They had to like practice their fingers. And when it's just 2 semitones, you can kind of practice it. You can practice going halfway with your hand. But if you had like a larger interval, like an octave, and you wanted to go like 1/12 of the way, it's almost impossible. Like you need to be superhuman to control the intervals. So this plugin is called Fluid Pitch, and what it does, it actually solves that problem. So I'm loading it as a Midi plugin in Logic or Ableton Live or Cubase or whatever. And then you can see that there's a keyboard here with the scale in it. And what it does is that according to the notes that I'm playing, it's gonna match the pitch bend to the key. So if I'm in C major, right, and I'm gonna play exactly the same thing that I played before. Sorry, my internal keyboard sound is on. Right? So now everything is in tune and I didn't have to do anything special. It just quantized it to the scale. Let's go to C minor or something, right? Suddenly, so everything is in key. So it makes it really easy to play musical stuff, like very very smooth musical bending. You don't have to think too much about where your finger is going. I'm just pushing my finger all the way up on the pitch bend. And to make things even more complicated, you can even get creative with this. So first of all, you can pick like different scales. Like you can pick a scale like a pentatonic or something. So maybe I'll go for like a minor pentatonic. And it gives me this warning that says, hey, a pentatonic has larger intervals than what your synthesizer is using. So let's change this to 12 so that it can support the larger intervals. And now I have stuff like, let's say this is my key, right? So maybe I'm playing, and it's really cool because if you're playing something like maybe a blues scale, right? So you can do stuff like, and it's really nice. Like you can have all these, fine grained control over licks that you're playing, which is it's super fun. And to make things even more, crazy, if you have an MPE supported instrument, like let's say I have something like, instead of this, electric piano, maybe I have something like a Rowley Equator. That's an MPE synthesizer. So I'm going to pick something like the breath flute uh, preset on the Equator, and I can enable MPE mode. And if I have MPE mode enabled, everything I just did will work polyphonically as well. So let's go back to this C major. And now I can do stuff like, I can play a chord, and the band will actually bend each note to the right place in the scale. So each note will get different bending, as if I'm doing uneven bands on a C board, but just with a regular keyboard. So it's super cool, right? It's stuff you could never do before without buying a dedicated controller. It's pretty nice stuff, and it actually this thing is actually pretty deep. You can actually do micro tuning on individual notes and have like non-Western scales. You can pick different scale degrees. There's a key switch feature where if you're playing live, you can just map different scales to like specific keys, so that you can change from minor to major, or from C major to C minor, or C major to D minor, whatever, live. There's a bunch of like fine grained control. Anyway, so it's a cool plugin. Like it really helps you like play a bunch of different styles of music, where before you had to either practice really hard, or just give up, which is what I would do. I would just give up playing difficult passages on the pitch bend, because like if I had to play a third in a pitch bend live, I'd be like, okay, no, I'm just gonna use portamento or something, and give it up because it's too hard, and I'll never. So this allows you to actually uh play those, and it works with every synthesizer that you're already using. So it works with software synthesizers, hardware synthesizers, whatever you're already using for the sound source, this will support. So it's pretty cool.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, there's so many things that I could ask about. I guess one thing that a lot of people don't know is that you're kind of a world-class keyboardist, aren't you? So I was going to put you on the spot and see if you could play a little tune for us. You got anything that you can play, like just off the top of your head? I'll put you on the spot. If you can say no if you want.
Something. I don't have any fluid pitch demo ready, right?
Yeah.
But I can definitely try to play something, just a regular thing that I'm, I guess, more have more practice on.
Yeah.
Let's try something. So let me switch here my mixer. Let's me close Logic there for a second.
Yeah. By the way, if you don't know, we have an audio developer community on Discord, and you can join us if you're curious about audio programming, curious how to create things like these, and you can join us over at theaudioprogrammer.com/community. Nice Discord. We're nearly at 5,000 people on the Discord now, which is pretty mind-blowing. I mean, I remember when we had like 30 people in our group. Yeah, wow, pretty awesome. Yeah, but what you got for us, Eyal? You got some stuff for us?
Yes, I'll definitely. So, but before I play something, I see some questions on the live chat.
Uh huh.
Alice is asking, does this make much more sense for MPE controllers? I have found those quite hard to tame, though. Rolly offers a lot of shaping for the bands, and this is actually quite right. So if you have something like this, like the Seaboard blocks, which I love, it's my one of my favorite cool different controllers, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so this gives you a lot of like fine grained control. Like if you want to bend from whatever, you want to hold C and bend up to E flat, you can bend exactly to where you want. So this is actually really cool. But uh, I would say that this is very only suitable for very specific kind of things because it's actually way harder for a keyboard player like me who's traditionally trained on the regular instruments, to play this. So, like, I mean, if I would just play a monophonic sound and I'd have to do a band, then this would give me like perfect control. But
Mhm.
if I would play a solo, like a fast solo, this is much harder to play than a regular keyboard, and that's I think where it's interesting. Like something like fluid pitch is interesting because it's like it will blend in when for situations when I can't use this, right? Like if I play something fast that has lots of finger movements and then the occasional bluesy pitch bend, I would probably not choose this.
Mm.
I would choose this if I do like a expressive slidey thing, and it would be like, so I would choose this in different situations, right? So that's why I feel like there's a trade-off, when you have more control in something like the Seaboard, uh because that more control means that you lose the bounciness, of just because a MIDI keyboard is something so simple. It's almost like you have buttons, right, that you click with your fingers, and uh I feel like the simplicity of a keyboard is really something that you really want in many situations. Like if you're playing a fast bass or a lead or something, then all I don't know. You don't you really want the instrument to respond to you in this way, right? It's kind of like uh, fretless bass or guitar or whatever would not be useful if you're playing a fast lead, like because then those in between notes and the slides are not they're like in your way. They're like they're almost like noise that you don't want when you're just trying to access notes. You want the fretted guitar and the fretted instrument. So I feel like there's a trade-off in how those things interact. uh but definitely if you want the most control, you get a Seaboard, right? Or a Seaboard block like I did, right? Or uh something like that. Now or maybe you get an something like GeoShred, which is like an iOS controller. That's a really good one that has also fine grained control over each note, and you can do intricate bends. So I feel like as a player, you make these decisions uh, according to whatever that you actually need to play. Right?
Yeah. Awesome. Do we have some more questions there? We got
Yeah,
some from Fadir, don't we?
yeah. So Freer says, I have an impression that some old keyboards have only 127 discrete points in range. Then with large ranges like an octave, the mapping is not exact. Could you please comment on this? So so that's actually an interesting point, right? Because okay, so maybe we have to explain this low level detail, which is a very interesting detail. So MIDI, right? MIDI is a very old format. Right now, there's going to be MIDI 2.0, which will kind of uh, fix a lot of these issues. But MIDI 1.0, the MIDI that existed for whatever 30, 40 years, is a very dumb format, and the message format uh, was very it was a format that's not very detailed. So most MIDI messages, like if you play a note, you get between 0 and 127, right? You get 128 possible values, which is very limited. So, for example, if you look at it in terms of like velocities or more accuracy, it's really not very accurate, right? It's really because the real world, like a real piano or whatever, has way more than 128 velocities. There's an infinite amount or something. So with the pitch bend, uh, so the pitch bend is kind of a hack in that sense, because what the pitch bend did, uh, pitch bend actually has two different values. So there's one 0 to 127 value for the tune, for whatever, for the, let's call it the note you're bending to, and then there's 128 other values for the fine grain control. So it's possible that like you mentioned, that older keyboards did not assign that second value, and then you would really get uh, a low resolution control. But in reality, I think most keyboards in the last few years, definitely most modern controllers, I don't know about, I haven't tested like super old synth and stuff, but definitely, but most keyboards and most soft synth, they treat this as one thing. So basically, you get a resolution of 128 times 128, which is 16,000 something. So there's actually quite a big resolution on the pitch bend. It's actually the controller with the most resolution in a MIDI keyboard. So usually it's pretty fine grain. Like you can, even if you have an octave or two octaves, you can probably hit almost every point in between, because the resolution is enough. Definitely, again, I haven't tested every old synth or something, but it's usually fine. Like it's usually good enough. I probably need to test with, like, I don't know, old MIDI, I don't know, stuff from the 80s or something that have different.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome stuff. Are you gonna play a tune for us? Got
Sure,
a tune for us?
sure. I was not expecting a concert, but let's. So I'm just gonna jam on one of my compositions and see what's gonna happen.
Yeah. As we do on the Audio Programmer podcast. See what happens.
Let's play this. Can you hear me playing?
Can you turn it up just a bit?
Let's see my mixer. So, oh, you know what? I'm not sending my direct audio. Here it is.
Big.
How's that?
Yeah, great.
Right. So, here we go.
Nice. Awesome. That was amazing. Was that freestyle or was that
That
no,
was a that was a piece. I messed up some of the sections, but it was something they wrote.
nobody noticed.
Nobody.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Yeah, so Vato asks, what's the best tool to build modern UIs with Juice? Funny enough, Eyal and I were just talking about this just recently.
Right.
So if you're not familiar, our friend Daniel, who's in our Discord community and the audio programmer community, he's actually built a fantastic tool for building UIs called Plugin GUI Magic. And you can check him out. The name of his organization is called Foley's. That's Foleys Finest. So Foley's Finest. And if you search that, and I'm sure you'll find it on his GitHub. But that is it's a great tool for building plugin UIs quite quickly. And it's almost like a what you see is what you get, almost like a Wix of Juice of Juice UI building. And we actually have a couple tutorials on the channel as well, where Daniel's done a walkthrough of that. So he would appreciate your support. So please go check it out. Plug in GUI Magic for Juice. Yeah. So cool. So let's go back to so your the fluid pitch. Yeah, what's that?
Yes, fluid pitch.
Fluid pitch. I'm glad I got that name right. So it won the Midi Innovation Award yesterday, and how many entrants were there? Do you happen to know?
How many entrants? I don't know. There were so the actual the award just had the finalists. So I'm
Mm,
not sure how many were considered. There were like 10 finalists. And actually it was such an interesting award because most of the participants were actually hardware stuff like controllers.
mm,
And I think there was one really good, by the way, iPad synthesizer that was there, and the rest of the stuff were all kinds of unique controllers. So there was, uh, and I actually, honestly, I really loved a lot of the other participants. So there was this guy who made this thing called Places, I think it's called, which was like sculptures, but they had like MIDI involved in them, so you could. It's super unique, super interesting.
mm.
One guy made this really high resolution guitar controller. There was a guy made a pedal that you can use for like all these like non-Western scales, like even do uh, retune your whole keyboard to like 24 steps and stuff like that. So there was all these interesting creations in that award. Uh,
Wow.
it was actually pretty brilliant. I actually loved watching it, and I actually today I was searching for some of the guys and just reached out just to talk to them because they made such cool stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so it was a very unique, thing because it wasn't like a plugin thing. We happened to be the plugin
Mm,
that was nominated there.
yeah. That's really awesome, and it really goes to show how much there is out there still to discover in terms of musical interfaces and just generating sound as well. I think there's a lot out there that hasn't been discovered yet, and feels like an exciting time for audio in general. I think audio development. Yeah, we have a few other kind of entities that are giving other perspectives on audio as well, which I think is really cool. Like you have, of course, you have Music Hackspace where the talk was held yesterday. Um, they're doing really interesting stuff, giving another perspective on audio development. And big shout out to JB, who's the head of Music Hackspace. He is doing his thing there and doing some really awesome stuff. And just seeing people really being creative at the moment. And I think if we look back even to a few years ago, even to a year ago, I think that the space to really get in and make something serious, you could only go down one of a few paths. And I think those paths are now starting to open up a little bit. You have Max MSP, you have Soul, of course, that's really come on, and they really came on with their 1.0. They released version 1.0 of their language, and that's really doing well and bringing a lot of potential for people to get into audio development. You have also Nick Thompson, who is also doing a really cool project that is actually using JavaScript. We're going to have Nick on the channel soon to talk about that project. So there seem to be some really interesting options out there. Yeah, it's pretty exciting time. What do you think? What do you think about all this, Eyal? You think we're going to be developing in C++ forever, or do you think that some of these other languages, some of these other options are going to be able to make a dent in the market?
Yeah, I think this is super exciting times the way this is concerned, because things like Soul and Nick's project that you just mentioned, uh, I'm really excited about those, because I think that when we're making something in programming, right, or whatever, it doesn't matter if we're making it, if we're writing code, or we're building a device from parts or whatever. What we're doing really is we take something that's uh, that's not accessible to the user, and then we make it accessible by patching things together, right? Code or whatever.
Mm,
And I feel like these Soul and all these other solutions that are coming up, uh, they're really helping to uh, basically expose different parts of the ecosystem. Like in the case of Soul, it's the DSP, right? It's the signal processing part, and they're helping to expose it so that you don't have to touch the wires to to make it come together, right? To make something quality. And I think that's a really good thing, and I feel like a lot of different fields have made there, like in game development, Unreal Engine and Unity and all these engines made it so that you can make games without necessarily touching all the internals of the system.
mm,
And I think that's a really good thing for audio. I think it will open up a lot of different avenues for developers and stuff.
yeah.
I think when we talk about like the future of languages and stuff, like C plus, if we're going to use C plus plus, I think there will always be uh, that place for C plus plus, because there's always, because it's really all about detail, right? And even in games, you can see that even now. Uh, so even if people write their games using Unreal, some studios will still make their own engine, because if you want to do a game like Spider-Man, you have to go deep into the system. Like, you can't use a pre-made engine by somebody else.
Mm,
uh so but it's definitely possible that the problems will be solved well enough for so that many developers will not need to touch the system, right? Just like you can make a lot of good games in Unity or Unreal Engine. uh because unless you want your game to like look, have like experimental new 3D technology, you're usually okay with current engines,
mm,
right? You just want to bring in your gameplay, your story, your characters, whatever, and it's fine that it's not bringing any new technology. And Soul or whatever, Faust and the other equivalents that will come up, they will allow you to do some of that, right? If you just want to, patch together some DSP algorithms, why would you want to look at how the system works?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Uh,
That's the hang up about C++ is that I really enjoy programming in C++, but it takes so long to create anything that is really of any significance. It's very tough to do something that you can just do in a tutorial. That is really significant. Even when we're doing a juice synth tutorial at the moment, just the fact of wiring up the parameters and just getting the sound right and getting the envelope to sound right. And, just creating all of the scaffolding that you need around any sort of any sort of instrument that plays sound just takes time, just takes hours. I mean, you look at Max MSP, it's literally like, you create a sine object, you wire it into, you give it a frequency, you wire it into a gain and out of a DAC, and you're there, and you've generated it. I mean,
Yeah.
tough to argue with that.
Yeah, but there's also the other side of that, and I'm gonna paraphrase some of my gurus. They're in the game world. There's a big, like, this same discussion is happening in the game world, because there's developers like Jonathan Blow, who made these games called Braid and The Witness and stuff like that, and he's like he has all these long lectures that he's doing about why it's important that you actually touch the system, why using an engine is actually uh, many times wrong, because it kind of hides details that are crucial to what you're doing, right? So like it might be easier, but then you're losing like the magic of solving these problems. So I'm living in this in between world where uh, I feel like it's actually interesting to solve the system problems,
Mm.
right? Because if you manage to uh, make an algorithm that has always been there, but you make it with less latency and less CPU, and you make the control simple, accurate, sometimes that's what makes it musical in the eyes of a musician, because we're all about speed and responsiveness, and that's one thing that Max doesn't have. I built a plugin for Denmouse, right? And he made the thing in Max at first. He had a Max patch. It worked just as he wanted. It was like an OSC controller that would trigger all his
Mm-hmm.
lights at stuff and stuff. But then the problem with that was, because Max is not a system library, he could not open lots of instances of that, right? It would overload his CPU, and in his live shows, he needs to be able to run a lot of instances of his plugins, and then run the music and the lights and the video art and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, uh, so we had to rewrite the thing in C++, because while the Max patch was absolutely great, and it did exactly what he needed, like once you can't use something for live performance and it's not fast enough and whatever, then it's almost useless,
Mm.
right? So that's a lot of the problems I feel like in the plugin programming scene, is that we're still not at the point where you can ignore the system, right? You
Mm.
still have to write to the system. uh, but I do feel like that there's a middle point there where especially something like Soul, because Soul is actually it compiles to a C++ program, right? It's actually something that has a lot of low level advantages.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe something like that would actually finally bridge that together. I still haven't seen any professional product that's using Soul, but I'm really excited about it. I've been to the workshops. I'm really excited about the way it's built. Uh,
Yeah.
so maybe after a few people get use that, maybe I will change my tone a bit, because now there's a solution that actually works and people play live with it. And
Yeah. 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 My friend Greg just chimed in and he said C++ is like turntables, and it actually brings up something that I was just thinking about, which is interesting to me, which is that I always think of the audio development industry almost like early '80s hip hop in some ways, that we have some limitations in terms of what we can do, and how difficult it is to actually kind of get something going. And because of that, in a lot of ways, it forces us to be more creative. Sometimes if all the questions are kind of answered for us, and this goes, I think, into any creative pursuit, when a lot of the questions are kind of answered for you, and then those answers become pretty uninteresting, and it becomes pretty dull. a pretty dull thing, and we see that a lot. I think. I mean, this might just my opinion, but I think we see it a lot with sometimes the music industry now in terms of uh, you have DAWs that have unlimited sounds and they have unlimited, you can just get any plugin that emulates anything. And there are no limitations, in terms of what you can get. And I think that what happens is that it forces us to it maybe limits our creativity. Whereas maybe if we had a limited palette of things that we'd be able to do, like you could use these three instruments and you have to create a song out of them, then I feel like we just get a lot more creative and we start thinking outside of the lines of what's conventional, and we start coming up with things that are interesting, like hip hop. Like you look at the turntable as an instrument. The turntable wasn't meant to be an instrument. It was something that was repurposed from from a piece of technology that was just meant to play a record conventionally, and people took it and they were actually able to repurpose it and extend the boundaries of it and make something that was new and interesting. So I do, and I think coding is like that in a lot of ways, in that we still have limitation, and it forces us in ways to come up with things that are maybe different from what the next developer comes up with. I mean, imagine if we just have like developers that imagine if we just had like a couple places where you could get code for a delay or for a reverb. Well, everybody has the same delay or reverb now in their audio app or in their plugin, and that to me is kind of boring.
Yes, exactly, and that's again, in the game world, it's a huge thing. Like, are you using? Because as some people will say, and it's kind of right to say that you can kind of recognize a Unity game, because I mean, even though there's amazingly creative Unity based games, they're all using similar similar pieces, if you call it that way, like similar physics engines and stuff like that. So
Mm.
there's a sameness to them that sometimes is not exactly what you want. Like sometimes that specialness of a great game, uh and I'm going back to like like there was this game a few years ago called Super Meat Boy, which is like a fast platformer game. And one of the cool bits about it is that it's you can see that they made it with their own engine, because it doesn't play like any other game. It's very different. Like, it feels cool and it's fast, and it's like you can play it on your laptop and on a console, and it's so there's something about the fact that it's custom, and it's and it's actually interesting because there's no 3D graphics on this game. It's just 2D. It's very basic controls. Like, it doesn't have anything that you get from a Unreal Unity game. Like, there's no crazy textures that rotating, and you don't get the free features. But then I feel like a lot of people actually sorry, a lot of people actually connected more
Mm.
to this specialness, because you can see that people worked on every keyboard response, right? People actually sat down and programmed how would it work when you press the space bar, what would happen when you do this,
Yeah.
and would, I don't know. So I feel like music is that way too. Like, there's a lot of the magic, of these old instruments, like you mentioned, that even a turntable or old synthesizers or the piano or whatever. Like, the magic about them is that people actually handmade a lot of these stuff. Like, people handmade how it feels and how it would respond, and I don't know. So there's something about it that I personally like. I feel like that's also where I feel like maybe plugins that I make will be, will have some emotional added value, right? Versus just being another piece of software.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think there's a flip side as well, that we see, like in video games, for example, where you look at a game like my game at the moment is Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and I mean, what an incredible game. I mean, it's absolutely huge, huge maps, really, and I just think, wow, how did they build it? Because they come out with an Assassin's Creed every year and a half, every 2 years, and the scale of it is just insane, and it's really it really blows my mind. And I just think, wow, you just have to have these, game engines, and you just have to have some of this stuff that helps you get up and running quicker, or else it would just take, if you were doing it all from scratch, it would just take you forever. But yeah, it's especially when you talk about AAA games and things like that. I think that we'll probably have something like that in the future for audio as well. I mean, we talk about building plugins and um, the things that we do. How long it takes just to build a plugin, any sort of plugin, to a decent level. But then we have these larger abstractions, don't we? Like, we talk about hardware, we talk about things that do sequencing, and these things that do timing. And I think that that's still a level that hasn't really been tackled in Juice, where a lot of that stuff still has to be done bespoke, doesn't it? Where, to create any sort of semblance of a track or a DAW. Well, you have Traction Engine for sure that does that. Has these higher level abstractions, but still quite. I think it's still, the threshold is still a little bit too high for audio developers at large to really embrace it and start using it.
Yeah, yeah, and you know what? As a programmer, I actually feel like there's a scaling that can be made. I feel like somebody that goes into this business, right, as to an audio developer, should know a range of abstractions. So, for example, uh, in my projects, I hate solving the same problems over and over, right? So,
Mm.
for example, there's some problems like, I don't know,
Loading a
connect
track.
yeah, connecting parameters to the GUI components, and maybe doing MIDI control of stuff. I don't know. There's all these problems that uh, you definitely don't want to set them up from scratch every time, right? It's annoying, right? And it's also like takes you away from actually doing something interesting. So in my case, I have a bunch of shared libraries that I've built for myself, right? That, like, my motto is, I solve a problem, and immediately I will go to my shared library and see if next time I tackle this problem, I can solve it with one line of code or something very, very quickly, right? I'll write a template or something that will allow me to not deal with this annoying problem again, right? And I feel like that's something that is really cool, because I have, like, when I start a new plugin project, I get up and running really quickly, right? It's different than when I had to start out with Juice for the first time, when I didn't have all these.
Mm.
But the advantage, that I do have, that I wouldn't have if I had used something like uh, Traction or whatever, right? Is that I control these abstractions. So once in a while, I'll look at my abstraction and say, okay, this is the wrong one. I'm gonna tear this apart and actually do it from scratch, right? I have this range of control that I feel like it's important when you want to have flexibility when
Mm.
you're building something, where sometimes the pre-made solution that worked for the previous plugin is good enough, but sometimes you want to go down to lower level. You want to touch the memory or something that in a way that's actually suitable for this next thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I feel like if you're a programmer and you want to uh, be professional, you need to be able to control to have a range of controls. You can't just, I mean, on one hand, you cannot do the same thing over and over again, because if you're just mechanically copy pasting code and changing stuff and you're doing the same things, that's boring, right?
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, if you're so you want to be able to also abstract the things yourselves. Like, for example, if you mention a DAW, uh, so even if you used the engine like Traction, or if you write your own DAW, whatever it is you're doing, you have to kind of solve its problems so that you can build on top of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have to, I don't know, create an abstraction for tracks and clips and timeline that you can do other things, on top of that, right? So it's I feel like there's a process here that's hard to define on when it's the right level of abstraction, and when it's too much. Because I also feel like if I don't see the detail, then I'm losing interest. Like for example, uh, uh, I worked on this project once that started with Unreal Engine. I didn't build the beginning of the project; it was built in Unreal, and it was great. Other than the fact that it had latency that we could not get rid of, because Unreal Engine does not let you touch the audio samples directly. Like it's not meant for that. It's not meant for somebody to create an instrument. It's meant to trigger samples in a game, right?
Yeah.
Then once we switched it to Juice and we touched the samples, we didn't have all the nice 3D controls that Unreal had.
Yeah.
That abstraction, but then so then we had to decide what's more important, right? Do we want the fine control over samples, or do we want to have a 3D image that rotates automatically,
Yeah.
right? So I feel like a developer needs to make the hard decisions on when they actually unwrap the stuff. And there's actually a few interesting questions about that in the comments.
Nice segue. That's really good.
Yeah. So yeah, there's some really cool stuff in the comments here. So first of all, um, so there's a comment here that's by Dvir, which is in Hebrew. So I'm gonna translate it for somebody who doesn't know Hebrew. Uh, he says "Hey Eyal, it's fun to see Israeli people." And he asked me, "Are you working in developing audio apps? And can I say what's it like to progress in the field as an Israeli?" Right? I guess it's an interesting question. I had to translate it because I realized that most people will not be able to read it. I don't know what's the Israeli ratio or Hebrew speakers ratio in our.
I would imagine not high.
Uh, so I guess that's an interesting question. I mean, I don't want to talk too much about myself, but in this particular podcast. But I do work in audio apps for a few years. I worked for Waves. I worked. My last job was for X for Records. I made a plugin for Deadmau5. I worked on one plugin for Polyverse. I was this consultant on this Fluid Pitch plugin. So I've been working on these kind of things like plugins and audio apps for years. Uh, but I think other than Waves and perhaps Polyverse are kind of Israeli too, I didn't really work, for Israeli companies necessarily. So it's not like there's this. I mean, Waves are a big company that's happening here, and there's also another really good plugin company called SoundRedix that are in Tel Aviv. But
Big
it's not
shout out there. Big shout out to Yair.
sure. These guys
Yeah.
do. By the way, that's another conversation.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm just saying that there's no Israeli scene in that sense. So my way of getting there was really getting involved with the international scene. Going out to NAM and trade shows, talking to people on the internet. So there's nothing very Israeli about what I do. I'm not. It's not like there's it's not like there's a Silicon Valley for plugins in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or something.
Mm.
I mean, some of my collaborators were Israeli or Israeli based, uh, but there's nothing. I guess there's nothing specific to this country that's helpful. I do have to say that there's really good Israeli Facebook groups and stuff where a lot of the interesting people will also be. For like there's a really good sound group that thousands of people are in that's talking about plugins in general. Uh, so there's some discussions about that, but there's nothing concrete that's happening here about plugin dev. Like if you want to be a plugin dev, you go to the Audio Programmer YouTube channel and you learn from.
Ooh.
It's not like there's some uh, anything that gave me an advantage locally. For instance. All right, so there's other questions here,
Mm.
uh, or other comments. I don't know if there's certain questions. Uh, so let's see. So first of all, Vivid Active IT, Vivid Activate,
Hmm.
uh, is saying that he's keen to see what Jonathan Blow's Jai language could be used in audio world. Uh, so I mentioned him before. Jonathan Blow is a game developer, and he in the last few years he's been working on a language. I honestly don't know so much about it. The one thing I do know is that his language is kind of a hybrid because it's also it has a C style quality to it. Like you can actually, I think, touch the memory and manage memory and stuff like that. So it's very different from a concept like Soul. There's another questions about Soul there. Uh, it's very different because it does not abstract away a lot of the system stuff. I
Yeah.
think I think what he did was, again, I'm not an expert, but I think what he did was a way that's from a syntax perspective made it easier to write like C gaming engines
Mm.
because he really cares about these low level controls. He didn't want to abstract away the system.
Wow.
So it's a very unique thing that he made, and I can't comment so much about it. I'm actually kind of interested now because he like streams all the time, updates and stuff, and I haven't been so up to date in the latest that he's doing. So maybe I should go to YouTube or Twitch and check it out because it's very interesting and very different from anything
Yeah.
else.
Wow.
Uh,
We got a question from Edward who asks, why are companies not interested in Linux users? Well, I guess I would say because there aren't a whole lot of people who are making music on Linux. I mean, can we say it? Can we expand on that at all, Eyal? Or I think that's really about what it comes down to.
that is an awesome question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome because people who use Linux, right, are very passionate about Linux, and I feel like rightfully so. So whenever that kind of discussion comes up about Linux, uh, there will be it's a very I don't know if charge is a word. It's a very emotional.
Yeah. Sensitive.
Yeah, it's almost like if you start debating about Mac versus Windows, like should you use Mac, should you use Windows? It's a People have a big uh what's the word, like they feel very close to the
Yeah.
system using. And it's true for Linux users as
Hmm.
well. They really like the system that they have. uh and uh and here's the thing, Linux. I'm not a Linux expert or anything, but I feel the problem with Linux is it's hard to reason about the system of the user because it's not like all the Linux users are using Ubuntu or
Hmm.
Debian or something. They're using one of many, many distributions. A lot of them customize their system in very interesting ways. So Linux is now this big world of stuff. Like, do you support X11 or this? Like, there's all these low level details that aren't there on Mac and Windows and iOS.
Mm.
So it's very hard to distribute any kind of software for for the stuff. And you can see that not just in the audio world. There's no Photoshop for Linux. There's no uh whatever, Final Cut Pro for Linux. Sorry. So there's all these. I mean, there are alternatives that were built and do work on Linux, but it's like there's no one system that we know that users will have.
Hmm.
And I think for a plugin company, it's very hard. Like you will need a serious amount of support if you build.
Just supporting Windows and OS X is just enough to keep a lot of plugin companies quite pretty occupied. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But at least on Windows, you can kind of, if I'm building some code for Windows
Hmm.
that shows GUI on the screen or whatever, it will most likely work on most Windows systems.
Hmm.
It's not the case in Linux. You might need dependencies on your system, and your distribution might not even support the one GUI system that you chose to use. So it's now very it's a wild jungle of support.
Yeah.
So it's kind of difficult, and I feel like there's also, of course, the problem with can you make money
Mm,
from this, right? And that's another thing, because Linux users are not usually fans of paying for software, right? They like open source stuff that's free to use. uh, so as a company, you need to make sure that all your efforts will eventually, make that money back.
yeah.
It's pretty hard, I think. So it definitely looks like, a lot of companies, and they mentioned Waves. So Waves do create Linux products, but they're not like plugins that the user is using. They will make their own, when they have like hardware systems or something, those will run Linux internally. But user space Linux, I don't know, user distributions is not common.
Mm.
uh, in the audio world in general. I mean, I mean, even I want to say most of the DAWs don't support Linux. I think Traction does and Reaper does.
And Bitwig does.
Which we get with Ardour and other. There's a few like
I don't know about that. Yeah.
Linux.
I know Traction does. I know Bitwig does. Reaper does. Those are the only three that I know.
Yeah, yeah, but none of the really famous ones does, like Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Ableton,
Mm,
FL Studio. All of these ones are not supported, right? Same for whatever Photoshop, Premiere, Final Cut Pro.
yeah.
So I feel like if you're a plugin maker, then usually or Pro Tools does not as well. So if you're a plugin developer, it's very hard to now reason about which environment will your plugin be opened in.
Hmm.
So so it's just complicated. I feel like unless a standard system of Linux will emerge, like unless everybody decides that all the Linux users will want to use Ubuntu or some distribution that will be decided, then I feel like this situation will not change.
Mm.
uh Maybe it does. Maybe some distribution will come and it will be, easy to use, kind of like, maybe like Windows but easier, so a lot of people switch to that.
Hmm. I don't know about that. We have another great question. How would you go about creating a MIDI plugin that detects chords you play and what scale you're in using Juice?
Mhm.
Well, if it's a MIDI plugin, I mean, the place I would start is the good news is that you know what keys you're pressing. So that's pretty helpful for knowing what key you're in. So I imagine that you just have to have a database, wouldn't you, of just different chord, different keys, and then you just test it against what test it against your database. Test what keys you're in against the database. Is that an oversimplification of the problem space? What do you think? What do you think, Eyal?
First of all, I think you've had in your here on the channel, you've had this you've had Chuck Matcat, who,
Mm,
who has an app that does that. It's called the Chordy app. So he has an app that, you know as you're playing notes on the keyboard, it detects the chords.
mm-hmm,
He's definitely more of an expert in how to do this, because he has a pro app that does it. uh, but it's so the question of chords is a philosophical question almost, and it's actually a question that music researchers deal with, regardless of code, regardless of any kind of
mm-hmm,
there's a few approaches, right? You can definitely say that, you can look at the chords in a static way, right? You can say that I'm going to look at the keys pressed right now, and you can extract the chord from either from a database or by using an algorithm to detect the intervals. There's a few ways, but It's certainly possible, but uh, it's get interesting because a chord, if you go into, and this is going to be a very nerdy rant, right?
Here
But
we go.
a chord is actually something that gets created as a result from the notes that are played and when they are played, right? So if you take some like Baroque music and you play like a chorale, right? Many times the chord isn't played as a unit. Many times the chord will be like a perception of the notes that happen to have fallen in the same time and maybe sustained from the previous chord. So there's all these uh, musicology approaches to how to analyze a chord because I like to do this stuff. So, you know, if you look at modern music like hip hop or something, and it's very possible the chord will be whatever C minor, C major, but then all the music that's played right now is like a bass, and that's it, right? And how would you know if it's C major or C minor? Well, you could look at the vocals, and maybe the vocals will do something like, uh, and so you can see that the vocals kind of passed on that E note, which kind of hints on C major. So we perceived it as C major. But to make things complicated, this is not always the case because, like in blues, sometimes the piano will play a C and the singer will actually sing an E flat. And you'll think, okay, well, maybe there's a C minor, but then only when the piano comes in with their chord later on, you hear that it's actually something like like a sharp 9 chord, and our brain conceives it immediately. Like our brain doesn't even think about that. Our brain thinks of chords like we think of about words. It's like we don't analyze, syllable by syllable. We kind of hear the context and we know if it's happy or sad or major or minor. Like we know what it is without naming it.
Mhm.
And musicians have a feel for what it is, but if you look for the name, you have to decide on uh how far do you want to read into the context. Like, do you want to go back to notes that have been played before and look for clues on the chord?
Mhm.
Maybe you only care about the chord that's playing right now and this second, like notes that are, because that's easier to reason about, but it will not necessarily answer every kind of question. Like, nowadays in modern music, uh, a lot of music is just bass and vocals some of the time. So
Yeah.
you might not even hear a chord. I don't know. It's a very, very hard question.
Yeah.
And the code you have to write would have to, I guess, first of all, uh, answer to what's your definition of what you want to do. And that's probably true for any kind of musical problem. Like, you have to first lay it out in words and see if it applies.
Hmm.
Uh, but the Chordy app, it's really good because I think it works with what's played right now. Like, it doesn't look at the history of music. It's because I think that app is more for people who are doing live tutorials.
Yeah.
Somebody does a piano tutorial, they play a chord, and then the Chordy app analyzes that chord and shows that it's C over G.
Yeah.
And it doesn't care about the history. It just cares about right now, and that's cool because the person doing the tutorial knows that they can change how they play according to that.
Yeah. I imagine that machine learning probably has some really interesting approaches for this type of problem. Uh,
Yeah,
because
but
yeah,
even machine learning would help. So machine learning helps if the algorithm is too complicated to put in words
mm,
or numbers, right? So if you're saying there's too many variants here, a human cannot calibrate it in a flat algorithm.
yeah,
We're going to put it into machine learning, and the machine will give us that algorithms. That's good. But in the case of music and chord analysis, there's the aspect of time. So are you going to put into the machine learning model the previous 2 minutes? Does it have it?
Yeah, you certainly have algorithms that do that take time into account, like dynamic time warping, for example.
Right.
Um,
Right, but I'm just saying, if you do that, even if you had machine learning, now your program needs to say, I'm going to wait X amount of time before I can give you the result. Is this applicable for the use case? Because something like the 40 app, if the guy doing the tutorial has to wait for a minute until it shows the chord, then people will lose interest, right? They want to know the chord right now,
hmm,
right? So it's only applicable if you can wait, if you're happy to analyze the entire context and use your algorithm.
cool. Got another interesting question from Velens, who says, I'm going to school for web development. How should I start to branch into audio programming? I'm also learning primarily Java at school as the language. Um, as a person who recently got their start in audio development, I could tell you a couple approaches. I started off with a language called processing, which is actually a library, a Java library that I learned kind of the logic side of coding with that. And then the audio side, I started with Max MSP actually. And Max MSP is nice because I think touching on what I was saying earlier, one of the tougher parts of C++ is that it takes quite a while to develop something of significance. Whereas with Max MSP, you can get something up and running in seconds, and it helps get you into the idea of how things are, how audio apps and audio algorithms are actually constructed, and how they're and the components that they use, and you can get them up and running quickly. It's almost like a step. It's 2 or 3 steps lower than being a music producer. So there are a lot of things that maybe if you were a music producer, you would take for granted that these things are set up for you. And then you have to, it's kind of a surprise, or it was a surprise for me when I started working with Max MSP, where I thought, oh, like something like tempo, I have to really kind of define what that is for myself. There's no just metronome that I just put in. So from there, then I moved towards C++. I actually used a framework called Open Frameworks, which is another C++ framework. It's great for like creative coding, like if you like to do visual stuff, visual representations, and it has audio as well. And then I moved into Juice, but I really think Soul is definitely a great one for that. I think is a great one that's kind of similar to Max MSP in its way of thinking, but it's also it's also typed out rather than just objects. So I think that there's a lot of room for education with Soul, and yeah. So I think there are quite a few options that are out there. I would look at maybe Max MSP or Soul to start out with. Um,
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. I mean, uh, the thing is, I guess if you want to work in audio, right, it's usually not one thing that you learn. I mean, you can be a C++ programmer in an audio company or something, but I feel like most of the time you need to learn the ecosystem of things, right? So it doesn't matter if you're starting with Max MSP, uh, or there's or maybe you do sound programming in Reactor. Some people do that, right? Just open a modular synthesizer, or maybe you take a programming language and you start to wire the things. Eventually you need to learn, if you want to make products, you need to kind of know the ecosystem, right? Which means that there's some components that are system components, like we mentioned, C++, like all the plugin formats and stuff like that. Like these, like if you want to make these, you have to know the system. But there's all other things that you don't have to know the system for, like the sound chain and how synthesis works, and those kind of things. You don't need to learn some specific language for, right? There's tools and whatever. So maybe I feel like there's there's some process that you have to go through uh, to
Yeah.
kind of what people are doing and how they're doing that. I can tell you that I feel like personally, uh, no, like having good control over C++ is really helpful because the ecosystem is a lot about that. Like if you walk into some company, some audio company, there's a big chance that they will be using C++.
Mm.
Uh, doesn't matter which company that is, right? Could be a plugin company, a DAW company, and hardware company. Uh, so even if they will work in some other language too, they will use C++.
Yeah.
So that's one of like a common something pretty common in that scene. Like even if you, for example, if you prefer Rust
Mm.
and you want to write your code in Rust, most other programmers you'll talk to will be C++ programmers. So you will have to know that too, or something. So there's I would say that will be almost like what's the word for it? Like there's
Common thread.
yes, exactly, right? Like that would be something common that you'll always find if you open the door to some office.
Mm. I think you touched on another great point, which is that one thing to understand about audio developers is that there are different types of audio developers as well. So, so one big thing is that uh, when it comes to starting, you have to. One thing that I would advise is asking yourself the question, well, what do I know? What do I know right now? What am I interested in? So, for example, if you synthesizers weren't particularly interesting to me. So in terms of learning synthesis and different ways of synthesizing sounds, I know the basics. I know like FM, AM, subtractive synthesis, things like that. But I wouldn't be the person to really develop a synthesizer. But DJing is something that I know very intimately about. So if you're talking about developing a DJ app, I know quite a bit about how a user would want to have the interactivity with the DJ app, things like that. So you have different skill sets that really go with what you're trying to build. So if you were trying to build a DAW, you would have to know a lot about like multi-threading. You'd have to know a lot about like things like file loading, systems level things. Whereas if you were maybe developing some sort of plug-in effect, then you would want to know more about digital signal processing and about, then that's a little bit more of a math thing. So you don't need a whole lot of math to develop something like a DAW. You just really need to know C++ really, really well. Whereas if you want to create something that's a unique a unique plug-in effect, then that's where the math and things like that come in. So you really have to ask yourself, what do I know now? Do I know my math really well? Do I really know how to, do I know the language really, really well? What am I interested in building? And then try to maybe shape your skill set around that foundation that you already have.
Yes. I agree with that.
Am, am I a full-time audio dev? That's a great question. I'm not. So do I develop for a living? That's actually kind of a tricky question because I do in a sense, because I make tutorials for this channel and it's the channel that allows me to make a living. So in a sense, in a roundabout way, yes. But in the truest sense, no, I'm not a developer. I would describe myself more of a manager, facilitator, on that side of things. So I'm great. I think that I'm quite good at getting a person from 0 to 1, getting a person started. But if you were to come to me and say, what's the best way to build this DAW? I wouldn't be able to tell you the answer, but I know who I would need to ask to find the answer. So, if you want to develop a really unique sounding, reverb, or you want to create like a really like a next level synthesizer, I know the people who could build that, who could like do like a killer UI, do something that looks like it's coming from one of the biggest plugin companies in the world. But in terms of like doing that myself, I could do like the basic version. I could do like the stick. I could do like the stick figure, stick figure version of that, but probably not. I mean, I don't know. I'd say probably not beyond that. But I have a DJ app that's pretty that's pretty significant. Does a lot of pretty complex stuff. So I'm all right as a programmer, but I'm definitely not like ninja level like Eyal is.
But I'm also, I have my own skills, but there's things that I don't know. Like for example, now, Ilya is asking about like math DSP stuff, and honestly, I'm really bad about these things. Like I mean, I can do basic sample manipulation things, but if I need to write like some filter, some I don't know, some tube simulator or a reverb or something, I have no idea how to do those, right? So I also have uh, a set of skills that I'm good with, and there's a lot of things that I would go to somebody else. Josh?
Yes. What is toasting? So we got Toast here with us. The audio programmer mascot has
Sure.
joined us today. um, so we have another great question. Which math topics would encompass audio DSP? So I believe linear algebra would be in there. Um, Depending on what you're doing. So if you're doing like spatial audio, that side of things, then you got like trigonometry, calculus, you got like physics, that side of things. Um, yeah, it really depends on what, I mean, you have some people who specialize just in spatial audio, like that's what they do. Uh, and you have some people who are just like, if you look at like Sean Costello, for example, I mean, he could probably do loads of different other things, but he really specializes in reverb. Like he's probably one of the best in the world at reverb algorithms, and he's been able to make a living just off of reverb algorithms. So yeah, it really depends on where's your knowledge level at, what are you interested in doing, and I say that to people who are getting who are looking to get a job as well. So a lot of people ask us, how do I get a job in the industry? And I say, well, what kind of job do you want? Really, who do you want to work for? Because if you want to develop on Ableton Live, for example, that would be a different set of skills than if you wanted to do something for, let's say, Focusrite, or like Native Instruments who don't necessarily have a DAW. So you really have to look at the skills. You really have to look at what type of job that you're really trying to get, and then try to shape your skill set around that skill set that you need for that job. Try to build like a simplified version of it. Was I always a programmer? No. I went to university in 2015, and I come from a DJing and music production background, and a psychology background. Actually, funny enough, I used to be a counselor a long time ago in a past life. So psychology, music production, DJing, and then in 2015, I went back. I went to university to learn how to code. Had never typed a line of code in my life, and have now been in the industry professionally for 2.5 years, which is pretty interesting. It's been a hell of a journey so far.
Which is pretty
But
amazing.
thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's been pretty awesome. But Eyal hasn't. Funny enough, Eyal, you haven't been in for. Yeah, I mean, you have quite a legacy, but at the same time, you haven't been in for a very long time either, have you?
Well, depends how you define it, right? Because
Yeah.
working in the music tech industry for definitely over 10 years,
Mm.
but I wasn't a programmer for some of that time, right? I kind of switched into being a programmer from doing other things. So I'm in this weird place where I have uh, a big background knowing things around the field, and being a musician, producer, but then doing, you know, uh, production tutorials and maybe making presets for companies or helping demo stuff at trade shows. So I've been around, that business for some time, and then made the switch into writing code. So it's kind of different from somebody, for example, who comes in from a computer science background and then just studies the music part.
Yeah.
Because to me, the music part was easy because I knew. I mean, a lot of people in the business were my friends, so I would talk and ask questions, not about code, but about how does this work and how would you do this and whatever. But then I had to just fill in the code part. But for other people, I feel like they have to take the other route. They know all the code stuff, but they need to know how VSTs work in Ableton or Logic and what are the differences. And
Yeah. I,
so it's hard to generalize this because it's such a. I feel like it's an industry where a lot of people have different specializations, so it's hard to say what's the what's the common root between them, because it's not like if you're a web developer, there's hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of web developers, so you can kind of generalize what a web developer is,
mm,
right? And an audio developer is more of a weird jungle of different things.
yeah. Yeah. I would say that you have, I would say roughly speaking, the categories that I think of, you have some people who are great kind of all around developers. They understand a little bit of DSP, or they understand at least how to take a piece of DSP, implement it. They really understand audio, like general just audio basics, like what is a buffer, what's happening in the process block. These are kind of like your foundation level sort of things. So you have some people who are just general audio people, can implement a UI, can do a little bit of everything. Then you have some people who are really good on DSP, maybe not the strongest C++ programmers, but they specialize in DSP algorithms, and that's what they do. They make DSP algorithms, and that's their thing. Um, you also have people who are more framework developers, like really low level, really understand just data and how data moves from one place to another. And they're more kind of framework developers, but not necessarily people you would necessarily have developing on your product. And yeah, so I think those are really kind of the general categories. I would say that it's really tough. I think that people out, I have clients who think that they can just hire one developer and that the developer will be able to create a product from beginning to end. And I think those developers are actually quite rare. I don't really know a whole lot of developers who can just really take a concept from a client and just do it the whole way through from the very beginning to the final product. So not a whole lot of those. Uh,
And
yeah.
I don't think a lot of those exist in other uh, development areas as well. Like it's very hard to find people who have the ability to comprehend a fully framed project. In web development, you can find a bit more of those because then when you make a website, it's a bit more contained,
Mm,
right? But when you talk about a program, right, like an app or something like that, it's definitely. I mean, there's definitely some solo developers, but they're not. Uh, there aren't that many of those just because there's a lot of aspects to it, especially when you do a cross-platform
yeah. Yeah.
development. A classic one is that you want to do your take your plugin out for both PC and Mac. You physically need to have a PC and a Mac.
Mm,
So that part already requires some resources, some understanding of different systems. It's and that's like this. That's not something that you cannot learn. You can definitely learn how to run Xcode and Visual Studio and find how to make it work and everything, and do the code sign on the Apple side. And it's like it's all things that you can learn, but it's already a skill that it's not like it's not a textbook skill. It's more of like a
Yeah.
practical thing you have to evolve uh into what you're doing.
Yeah. I think the learner, I think more than anything, in terms of like skills, I think just the ability to learn new things and the ability to just digest new information and to take projects that you don't know how to do and you don't have any sort of thing to do, and to open up some sort of API that you don't have any idea about, and being able to just kind of baby step through the API and just figure out things step by step. I think more than anything else is probably the strongest asset of an audio developer, or maybe even just a developer in general. It's just that ability. You have to have the ability, and I think that like for me, I think that's when I knew that I could, like, if I wanted to, I think I could develop for a living, because I can take concepts now where I get something that I haven't done before, and then I can just start reasoning and breaking down the problem and thinking about, oh, well, this is one approach, or this is one way that this could happen. And then you start looking through the API, you start looking through the juice documentation, you see a class that, that could be used for part of the solution. And you can start like going through the code and start reasoning about, well, maybe this is the way that the code gets set up, looking through the forums, asking questions when you get stuck. That's really the process. I think it's not about just, like, it's so rare to say, to find somebody where you say, okay, I want to build a doll, Eyal, I want you to build me a doll. And he'll say, yeah, I've done that exact thing before. A lot of times it's just too big, and that, Eyal would have to go out and he'd have to search, he'd have to do research, and he'd have to do a little bit of an R&D mission on finding out the different kind of components of being able to do that. But the most important thing is being able to reason about, well, you would need something like this. You're going to need some sort of thing where you're going to be able to switch audio devices. You're going to need to have some sort of, representation where you're going to have some place where you're going to host VSTs. So you're going to have VST hosting capability. You're going to have to be able to load files, things like that, and be able to put together a set of requirements and then just start building it step by step. That's really what being a developer is about, in my opinion.
Yes, I totally agree. And it's really funny because even as a seasoned developer, there's always the thing where you start a new project and sometimes you get overconfident. You're like, oh yeah, of course, I've done that before.
Oh yeah,
New project, 2 months ago, I'm just going to do the same thing, and then you realize that you know the slightest change in the definition of the product is actually means that you have to, as you mentioned,
oh yeah,
research the thing, break it down. Uh, so there's, it's never a state of. That's why it's always a problem when people look for, uh, the cure, the ready-made solution for how to do things.
mm,
It's more about understanding the aspects, right? Uh, and then seeing how you can apply, all. Or maybe sometimes not even apply to yourself. Sometimes maybe you have to know that, hey, this is a complicated field. You need to bring in an expert.
yeah, exactly,
Like,
absolutely.
again, I know the very basics of DSP, but there's no way I could write a reverb algorithm like Sean Costello or somebody like that. So if I wanted to do that, I'd have to bring somebody like that in. It's just like that's a field that I already know, that I know generally speaking how it works, but I know that it's requires an expert,
Yeah,
right? So that even he will need to spend in a big amount of work to do something that's not an exact replicate of what he's done before, even though he's an expert.
exactly.
Uh, so I think there's in programming you kind of there's you kind of have to start recognizing the pitfalls, like what's way more complicated than you can solve yourself, where it's better to use a pre-made solution or hire a person.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the great things about our Discord group as well, is that we have some people in there that are mega geniuses, probably some of the best audio programmers in the world, in their respective fields. And I don't know, it's so rare that I see things that nobody is able to answer. Like I think maybe graphics is one of those areas where that's like kind of a still kind of a dark art in a way. Like OpenGL and Metal and Vulkan, that side of things. But yeah, I think there are a lot. The majority of questions, there are people around who can actually help answer those things. But it's important to know when to phone a friend.
Yeah,
um,
you know what's interesting, that people don't get it, but it's like so much of a plugin development is actually about UI, and there's never one way to do UI. Like it's always like always there's always be like the solution to do one thing, and then the new product will want some different interaction, and then the previous solution no longer works. You have to really know how to solve UI problems. It's not like there's no magic that will auto solve that for you. And it's like people think that that the plugin development, whatever, is just writing some DSP and then magically connect the UI, but it's the other way around. In many cases, the DSP will take you a couple of days to solve, but the UI will take you a month to get the right interaction,
mm,
even if you're an expert, right? Just because the problems are complicated, the problems are creating the right flow from one feature to another, making it look good, look like smooth and not like be fiddly, right? Because sometimes you create something and it works, but maybe the controls aren't accurate, and the user will not easily understand what's going on. So there's a lot of process about that, and it's never the one. There's never one tutorial that will show you how to do the perfect UI, right?
yeah, absolutely. But we're going to show you some in the very near future. It won't give you the perfect UI, but it'll help you get started.
Question I wanted to address. There's one question by Dan Jones.
Hmm.
So he asks, anyone here know the best way to be able to load a VST in the stream of a VST? I'm trying to wrap my head around making a VST that would be like a pedal board where you can load VSTs in a chain. And I feel like this is a really good question, because this actually shows how like things in audio come together, right? Because the, the idea of loading a plugin, just one plugin, being able to load it, is that means you have to understand how plugin hosting works, right? There's some mechanics there. You can look at the Juice Audio plugin host, and you will see how they implemented those mechanics, right? Of bringing a plugin, bringing uh, uh, playing audio through the plugin, scanning the plugin, showing the GUI. Like there's a bunch of mechanics that need to happen for the thing to exist. And then there's another aspect of after you've internalized the flow of everything in a plugin, you want to make a product that has a multiple of those, that maybe has a chain, right? Has an order. Maybe you want to be able to change the order of plugins, like in an instance chain in a DAW. Maybe it's a standalone thing. Maybe so so all the I mean, I think we probably need to do at some point a tutorial about hosting, but it's once you understand uh the different flows, and it's just a very low level. There's all these like low level answers to this question, right? uh because hosting a plugin is more complicated than you might think, because a plugin, if you're hosting third party plugins, one of them could crash.
Mhm.
What happens if the user's plugin crashes? Like, does it crash your entire program? Do you find some way around it? It's complicated. Are you scanning? Uh, are you going to scan from a directory, or are you going to scan from the system directories? Like, there's all these like product questions you have to think about, right? It's not like do you now have a configuration window that the user can bring in all their external plugin directories? Are you supporting VST3 and audio units and
Yeah.
VST2? I don't know. It's like there's all these questions when you make a product like this that would would make the answer more complete. The straightforward way is, once you know how to bring up a plugin is basically just a function that processes sound, right? So you can call these in a chain,
Mhm.
but everything around it would be pretty complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another great question from Paxalis. I hope I didn't mispronounce that. And Paxalis asks, I would like to kindly ask you, what are the C++ sections or principles that should be considered when developing real-time audio applications? So once again, it's really difficult to say because it depends on what type of application that you're building. So, but I would say generally speaking, we have a tutorial series that we're doing where I actually teach my son C++. That's here on the channel, and we're starting to wrap up a lot of the very basic fundamentals. So there are a couple other ones. So you have to know all of your kind of basic logic, if statements, for loops. What is a function? Returning functions that return a value. What are classes, things like that. Then you have kind of the next level, which is kind of higher level abstractions like classes, how to interact with classes, what is inheritance, what's a pure virtual function, what's an abstract class, uh, overriding functions. I think once you get through that, like then you can kind of step into juice. But then like I said, the level of C++ that you need to be at in order to create something really depends on what you're creating. But you have, like, for example, let's say that you have some sort of application where, like I have one that, where you click on a track and it needs to calculate the BPM of the track to move on to the next before you're able to load it. The problem you run into is that you run into a threading problem, because what happens is that when you click on the track and the BPM detector is computing the BPM, and it blocks your UI. You can't do anything, and the UI freezes. Well, that means that you likely need to move the BPM detection over to a new thread. So then you need a skill like knowing how to set up a thread, or knowing how to set up. You have these ways that you can run like a small task by just like kind of setting up a really quick thread, doing the task, and then killing the thread and things like that. So then those skills start coming into play. So it really just depends on what you're building. But when it comes to plugins, I would say it really just starts off with like those fundamentals, like the stuff that I teach my son in the series, and those other things that I mentioned, and you'll be and from once you have that, you'll be functional. You'll be able to move around and actually actually kind of make your way around a bit. Yeah. Anything to add, Eyal, on that?
Uh, I mean, first of all, that's really correct. I feel like there's because nobody really knows the entire C++. Like, C++ is massive, so even if you take an expert in C++, there's probably corners that they have to you know look up if they run into them as well. And I think the main thing is that you need enough control of the language to be able to read code. right? So that you can read it. Because again, like you might not know everything, but you need to understand the flow of the language, like you mentioned, classes, inheritance, if statements, for loops. You need
Pointers, references.
to
Yeah.
be able to kind of let's say you open a source in Juice or in some library that's built in C++, you need to be able to sort of follow that and see what's going on, right? You don't have to know everything, right? Because every piece of code will have complications that you will not be able to follow, but you need to have a way to solve those kind of problems, right? So it takes some control and experience in the language, uh, that I feel like it would be really good if you have it, because otherwise, and you see that happening sometimes where people don't like I don't know, they have problems with how memory management works, or like references or pointers. So then every problem they run into is like this big deal. They don't know how to fix the syntax, and so you really need to be able to get to a point where at least when you run into a mechanical problem, you know what to search for, you know how to test your problems in isolation, so you can, for example, let's say you look at something that you don't know, you can maybe open a new console C++ app and try something that's like that. So you can see if your problem is in your code or in the Juice code. You need to be able to debug. Like,
Debugging. I was going to say debugging is huge. Is huge. So underestimated. We actually have a video coming out next week with my friend Aaron Leese on debugging itself. So be sure to check that out. But debugging is huge. I think one thing that's also underestimated is that when you've been developing for a little while, or once you have a little bit of experience under your belt, sometimes you get these errors, or sometimes you get these things that happen and it doesn't directly point to the thing that's actually wrong, but you can get a good intuition for what's actually happening. And I can't even really describe what it is. It's almost like a sixth sense of, I can't really explain it, but it's one of these things that when you've been developing for a little while and something goes wrong, it's almost like the idea, like something just pops into your head and it says, oh, it's this. I just, or what about this? Yeah, it's something that really just comes from experience. Sometimes you'll get errors, like if you've been working in an IDE for a while, like Xcode, where the error isn't pointing towards the error, but because of the way that it's set up, or because of the way it's giving you the error, you can actually get a good intuition about what the error actually is, what's actually happened. Sorry, that's my dog chewing her bone in the background. um,
no,
yeah.
there's
So yeah,
there that's quite intricate, but I thought it would be cool to address, although we can't address the whole thing. But it's so this question by Tali Digital Media. He asks, or they ask, sorry, does Juice have a way to segment what developers have access to, or what is the best way to have different people working on different pieces of an application so nobody can take the whole thing? And this is actually a very interesting question that I've been thinking about as well, because um, in some, I mean, sometimes it's totally fine for everybody in the company to see every piece of the code, but sometimes there's secret pieces of the code. They're like protected by your IP, by your intellectual property. Like sometimes, let's say you want to have some special DSP algorithm that you bought from some expert, and you can't just have any developer that might be working from home or wherever be exposed to it, right?
it's kept in a gold box with a lock.
And it's not super easy to do, but it's definitely possible to do. So uh but that's not really a Juice thing, although Juice presents some special complications about that. It's more of a C++ thing. Like so the classic way to do this is to pre build the thing into a static or dynamic library, right? So then you have the whatever developer that works on it in isolation. They have access to the source code, and they will have to build on their machine. If it's they'll build a dynamic library or static library object file that you can link with the rest of the C++ code. So it's a pre-built code. You will not have access to the entire code. Usually, what you do in cases like this is you expose a header file that only has the calling convention. Like you say, okay, well, here is some functions that we do want the user to know about. Like, so a good example would be how VST plugins work, right? If we're buying a VST plugin, we know that there's going to be a process block function, right? Or the equivalent of the VST3 call to process block, but we have no idea what's going to happen inside process block. That part is hidden from us. It's only the developer knows about it, but we can load it and run it. So it's pretty much the same with code that you want to integrate on your own. However, Juice makes it slightly more difficult just because there's some complications in how Juice is built. Maybe it's something to talk about in another video because it's a very involved issue. But if you wanted to build a static library or a dynamic library using Juice, and you wanted to link with somebody built separately, like you want to build your part and somebody else to link with that, you actually need to hide Juice as an implementation detail. So what it means is that you'll need to expose headers that have your own functions like process audio or show GUI or whatever you want to call your functions, but you cannot expose Juice types like I don't know, components or audio buffer or something like that. You'd have to hide these so that because Juice will need to build privately, just because that's how Juice is structured. Juice is structured so that whenever you build it, it needs to build with a set of flags that only the developer has, and uh, and if you want to have like two separate units, you're going to have to maintain some code structure that's absolutely separate. And you will see that that's how it's done in a lot of libraries, like, for example, how VST3 works. Because if you're hosting, or VST3 or audio unit or whatever, if you're hosting a VST plugin, you have some header that you're aware of that has a few functions, but that's it. Like, you're exposed to some interface that you and this other developer can agree upon. So it will make the development harder, because it's not like you can put something on GitHub and share it. You need to have some agreement on how this will work. A simple way would be to have the developer produce a VST version, for example, or something, but sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes you need your own proprietary format. But it's definitely an issue in the C++ world, because sometimes these security measures have to come in place. Like, not everybody are just single developers with one code base.
Nice. I think it might be a good time to wrap up. We're running in at 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours in. Yeah, nice little run. And I think my dog needs to go outside as well. But this is cool. Yeah, we're talking about trying to make this a weekly thing. Yeah, which would be awesome, and bring some other people in as well. I'm sure we have a whole bunch of people who would love to come in and say hey and talk about all the awesome stuff that they're up to. So yeah, anything to say, Eyal, before we sign off?
No, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Perhaps next time we could get even a bit more technical and maybe open some code and start getting into it, because some questions are just answered clearer when we see the details of the implementation, right? Otherwise, sometimes we're around the subject but not really answering the meat of the question.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we definitely need to do some tutorials. I mean, there are so many that I want to do, custom components look and feel class is definitely one that people ask me about all the time. Stuff like implementing image files, things like that. That's a good one. Building another one that I want to do is building and packaging plugins. So you finished your plugin, now you want to distribute it. How do you distribute the plugin? That's one I definitely want to do. Yeah, there's loads of them. Yeah, and if you have other ones, that you'd like to know about, please feel free to leave a comment on the video description, under the video description. You know where to leave it. And join our community once again. So you can join our community on Discord. We're right near, we might have broken 5,000 community members today. So you can join us on the audioprogrammer.com/community. And yeah, we will sign off. We hope to see you next time. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. See you later.